I want to answer the question, can communism work? Historically, my default answer would have been, of course not. We've seen it play out badly over and over again. But I wanted to really be intellectually honest and dive deeper into communism and socialism and understand what these things are really all about. Let's start off with understanding what is the goal? What is the goal of socialism and communism? And those are kind of seen as a continuation. Socialism is basically a step towards true communism. And communism being, you could call it Gene Roddenberry's ideal for the future of Star Trek, where money doesn't exist anymore. People simply work for the benefit of mankind, and automation makes everything possible. That is really the idea of the ideal of communism, I would say. So what is the goal of these? Let's kind of break that down. Effectively, what these are trying to look at is a world where people can fulfill their individual potential without forces keeping them at bay. And those might be market forces, they might be employer forces, whatever they are, fear, whatever those forces might be. We want to unleash the potential of human beings. Thomas Sowell actually talks about that in his book called A Conflict of Visions. And he calls this the unconstrained vision. So there's the constrained vision and the unconstrained vision. He does a way better job of explaining what these are than I could do in this little video. So the unconstrained vision is basically idealized as the ability for human beings to throw off the shackles that keep them constrained. They are limitless. They have infinite potential. They can progress. And if we can just remove their barriers, they would indeed progress. So that's the idea of this unconstrained vision. That's where a lot of this comes from is how do we get out of people's way? And a lot of the things that we see with maybe it's capitalism or maybe it's market forces or maybe it's government regulation, these keep barriers in people's way so they're not able to do what they really need to be able to do. You know, maybe we're living day to day and month to month in order to make ends meet, and we're not able to become the poet that we were supposed to be, or the artist or the author. Okay, so that's the idea behind this. That's the really fundamental challenge behind socialism and communism. So what is socialism? What is communism? Socialism is where the means of production, distribution, and exchange are owned and regulated by the community as a whole. So that's socialism. So the means of production are basically managed by the government, whether it's local government, your community, your state, your region, your county, your parish, your country, whatever it is. But the means of that production, the means of the distribution, and how things are exchanged are owned and regulated at a higher level. You don't own your own means of production. So that's the idea. And if we can move to that, then theoretically we can make things better. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then communism, what is communism? So communism is further along that ideal. It's where all property is publicly owned. And ideally, we don't even have market rates. There's no valuation in terms of money. You're not working for money. You're not working to exchange things. You simply work according to your ability and you get things according to your needs. So your needs are taken care of, usually through some sort of automation or maybe through other people's work with a lack of automation. But hopefully we get to an automation side of things. And so that's the idea of communism is now all of your needs are taken care of and you simply produce what you're able to produce in that world. Basically, the problem with these comes in a couple of forms. One is scarcity. Scarcity makes things really, really difficult to deal with in both socialism and communism. If you have scarce resources, we have a problem. And so that's where the idea of AI and automation can come into play. I'm going to get to those in a little bit. Let's start focusing first on, can socialism and communism work in the absence of AI and automation? Are these capable of sustaining positive life for people without AI and automation? And then we'll come to the AI and automation and see what the possibility is for the future. So in a world with scarcity, where we don't have AI and automation that's really taking care of these things, we do need to govern work, markets, and value in general. We would call it currency, but value in general. And we can either do that in a centralized way or a decentralized way. Well, we've seen centralized ways play out over and over again. We've seen it through USSR, we've seen it through North Korea, we've seen it through Cuba. These don't tend to work out. In fact, they tend to lead to millions and millions of deaths. This is not a great way to do things. Now, there's a great author by the name of Wobachevsky, I think is his name, that wrote a book called Political Ponerology. And he talks about how a lot of these ideologies will create the conditions that are rife for psychopaths to invade an organization. And that becomes a pathological organization, or a pathocracy, as he calls it. And so this is the genesis of evil, is when pathological individuals are able to take control of the system. And that really is pernicious in centralized governments, centralized planning. So we know centralized planning is not ideal. So what that leads us towards is, if we're going to do this without AI and automation, socialism and communism are going to require decentralized planning. And this, to me, harkens back to the story of Moses when he was trying to set up his first government. And he basically created subsidiary structures. He created a council of maybe there were 10 that reported to him. And underneath that, there could have been a group of 20 or 50, and then another group of 10 or 20, and so on and so forth. So we create these subsidiary structures, these organizational structures that are able to decentralize decisions. So actually, there's a biblical reference for being able to do this. So, okay, so let's assume for a moment. I mean, there's all sorts of problems with being able to have markets and workforce and be able to determine things and ensuring that things are as equal as you can get them, because we certainly don't want the bourgeoisie. We certainly don't want drastic unequal distributions of power and wealth and socioeconomic status, things of that nature. We want to get rid of that. So certainly there's going to be a situation where group A way over here and group Z way over there maybe have a large disparity in terms of what they have. And so now you're going to need to be able to redistribute that, et cetera, et cetera. So that certainly could be a problem, but I'm going to take it on faith that maybe we can have that and that could work out. So let's assume for the moment that we could truly decentralize and create a system of government where it is incorruptible. Okay, let's assume that for the moment. That moves us to the next problem, which is around the work. So without automation, we need to make sure that the motivations for work are in place because we're dealing with scarce resources. And so the way capitalism deals with this, and I would argue the reason capitalism erupted in the first place, it wasn't designed this way. It simply evolved out of the fact that people work harder when they get the fruits of their labor. That's just a fundamental nature to reality. So if you're not going to reward people for the fruits of their labor, because the fruits of their labor have to be distributed equally to the best of your ability, or at least based on need. Maybe it's not always equal, but based on need. That means that if you're producing more, you don't necessarily need more. So you need to necessarily give away. So how are we to deal with this? Well, there's basically three ways that this can result in an outcome. Number one, you find the virtuous. You find the people that are willing to work to give away their labor and their products and their time to others. And that is your virtue. And you want to reward that. You want to hold that up and you want to punish that which doesn't meet the standard of your virtuousness. Number two, people can become lazy. People with talent and skills and abilities, intelligence, they could basically slack off, for lack of a better term, while they produce the same outcome as everybody else around them. Option three is those individuals with talents, skills, abilities, intelligence, they can produce more and they can secretly hold on to some of that in order to gain the benefits of their labor. And this leads to underground markets and black markets and so on. So let's look at these three. These are basically the only three outcomes you've got. Number one, the virtuous. So if you're able to find the virtuous, what you're going to do, first off, I highly doubt you're going to be able to get much more than 1/10% of people that are actually going to be virtuous. But let's go out on a limb. Let's say you get 20% of the population that is willing to work virtuously. They are willing to work and give away their labor, their time, their products to others because they believe in the goodness of humanity. 20% seems like a stretch, but let's pretend. So you've got 20% of the people. Well, what do you do with the rest of everybody else? What do you do with the people that aren't exhibiting your virtues? Well, you punish them. You put them in prison. You fine them. That's what you do. That's what laws are. Laws are all about holding up the virtuous and punishing those that don't conform to the ideal of your virtues. Laws are always moral in nature. And so this is the morality of things. So that would necessarily lead to a totalitarian state. There's no way around that. If you're going to uphold the virtuous and rely on the virtuous's influence and their work, you're going to necessarily punish everybody else. And that will create a state where you police that and punish that. And that ultimately leads to the totalitarian state. Okay, so that one's out. Let's look at option two. People become lazy. So you've got people that have intelligence, they've got talent, they've got skills, they've got knowledge, but they don't use it all because, well, why? Why would they put in more effort when they're not going to be rewarded? They can just sit back and relax. We're going to carve off for the moment that that's going to be very destructive to society and progress moving forward in innovation. But ultimately what that means is other people are going to realize that they're not working according to their ability. They're not putting in everything they could, which means, yep, you guessed it, a police state. That means we're going to need to necessarily create a totalitarian system where we police the state and we punish those that are not virtuous. In other words, not working as hard as they can and rewarding those that do, but only so much as we don't create terribly unequal outcomes. So that one doesn't work. That also leads to a totalitarian state. So option three is the underground market. Well, this goes without saying, this is definitely going to lead to policing because you certainly can't allow people to undermine the whole system that you built. That will lead to a policing and therefore a totalitarian state. So in all three of these cases, you're going to lead to policing. You're going to lead to narking out people, snitching on people, and making sure you punish those that don't conform to your ideals and your virtues, thereby creating a totalitarian state. There's no way around it. You have to do that because if you don't, it undermines the very nature of the system. And when the system itself is policing to make sure the system stays in place, that is totalitarianism. It's hard to say. That will require everybody to pretend like the laws of reality don't actually exist. So all that to say, that becomes its Achilles heel. Without AI and automation, I don't see any way that communism and socialism don't devolve into totalitarianism. And they're accelerated along the way through ponerology. They're accelerated by psychopaths that infiltrate the weak points and corrupt the whole system from on high and basically just create a devastating effect. I can't see another way out of it. So does that mean AI and automation are our saviors? Maybe. Let's take a look at these. So let's start with automation, because that's kind of the easier one. So in this world, automation, obviously, we're going to need to get to a point where people have to build the automation in the first place. We're going to maybe compensate them through capitalism, but then immediately take over the means of production. And now the automation just exists. Okay, wonderful. So we live in a world where everything's automated, much like maybe an iRobot or something along those lines. So we've got these robots that do the menial labor, and they allow us to simply be the best versions of ourselves as human beings as possible. Seems a little ideal to me. We're not moments away from it, but who knows? Maybe the AI revolution's coming and we're going to see true artificial intelligence that's capable of it. We can't even create a robot that's capable of doing dishes and or laundry. So why do we think we're going to be able to automate all the menial labor? But who knows? Maybe we get there. So there's the automation side of it. Let's assume for the moment that we get there. So that leads us to the AI side of it. This is where the centralized and decentralized economies and market decisions are going to come into play. Because again, remember that the whole goal of this isn't to govern markets and money. The whole goal of this is to get rid of money and get to a point where justice itself is meted out as fairly as we possibly can. So what we're talking about is an AI that is so intelligent that it's able to figure out what people need and what people are capable of at any moment and any time, and rewarding and demanding from people when they're not meeting to those ideals. So this is an hyper intelligent, overarching system, artificial intelligence system that is making market decisions and valuation decisions, as well as justice decisions. This is governing all aspects of our lives across the board. This sounds an awful lot like God. And so what we're talking about doing is replacing the God of the Bible, the God of Christ, the God of our universe, with an AI, an artificial God. Well, that sounds a lot like the Tower of Babel. It sounds like we're going back to the story of Genesis. By the way, I don't think we've gotten away from the stories in Genesis. I think we're still stuck in Genesis for a lot of reasons. So this sounds like what we're doing is saying, okay, we're going to replace God with our own artificial God, and we're going to serve that God instead, because it's going to decide what I get, what I do, how I do it, and whether or not I'm actually doing it appropriately and being just. So we're going to replace an all-loving God with a completely unloving God. Okay, that's interesting. Now, my atheist friends would tell me, well, Chad, that only works if you believe in God, and I don't believe in God. Okay, let's look at that for a moment. So what you're talking about is we're going to go from a universe that has no God, which I think is the harder leap of logic to make. But let's make it. You're going to talk about going from a universe where there is no God, nothing is ruling your actions, you are completely free to do anything you want, to introducing a God whom you serve. We're talking about an artificial AI God whom you will serve, and whom you will serve in a slave-like way. So you're now, my atheist friends, you're talking about giving up your freedoms to serve an AI God? Okay. So I don't understand, putting all this together, whether you have AI on automation or not. I don't understand how socialism and communism result in something better. Without AI and automation, it devolves into totalitarianism. It always has, and I believe fundamentally it has to. It's the nature of it. There's no way to get there without it. It is paradoxical in nature. And with AI and automation, what we're talking about is the enslavement of the human race to the machines, which honestly does not feel better. It feels like the story of every sci-fi movie we've seen for the last 50 years. So somebody's going to have to explain to me what exactly communism and socialism bring to the party other than a bad time. So to summarize, can communism work? Can socialism work? My answer is no. Fundamentally, no. They miss the very nature of what it is to be human. Yes, things are not perfect in capitalism. Yes, we have people that are centralizing power and centralizing money. But moving towards socialism and communism is not the answer. We need to talk about what the answer is. We need to figure out how we address some of these things if they are indeed a problem. I'm not sure that they are, but if they are a problem, let's at least have the conversation there. But let's move towards something that's truly progressive and not regressive and destructive. Can we finally get rid of this idea of the unconstrained vision? I don't know that we can, but that's my 2 cents on it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening.